social media companies have come under pressure to combat so-called misinformation and disinformation. So in their quest to do so, they've increasingly relied on fact-checkers, such as the RMIT Fact Lab. But these fact-checkers have been controversial. There are concerns that the fact-checkers are biased, both in terms of what they choose to fact-check, what they choose to not fact-check, and how they conduct their fact-checks to begin with. However, now in a victory for free speech, Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, has decided to abandon fact-checkers in favor of community notes. So let's discuss what is going on. Now, the catalyst for this appears to be Donald Trump's election in the United States. Thereafter, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, which like I've said owns Facebook and Instagram, decided to meet with Donald Trump. And he realized that the writing is on the wall. In the past, he'd been going along with what the Democrats wanted. For example, suppressing things such as the Hunter Biden laptop story. But now he realized that Donald Trump was victorious, and he realized he could no longer go along with what the Democrats wanted. He perhaps even had a change of heart. Mark Zuckerberg appeared to be particularly more favorable to Donald Trump this time around than in the past. Whatever the reason might be, he met with Donald Trump, and then shortly thereafter, Meta decided to abandon fact-checkers in favor of these community notes. In their announcement, they said several things. This includes that they believe that fact-checkers could become biased, they could become perhaps ideologically siloed and ideologically blinkered and myopic, and therefore might only fact-check one side of the debate, or alternatively, they might fact-check things in a biased manner. This situation became so important that Mark Zuckerberg himself put out a video detailing what Meta was deciding to do. And here are a couple of highlights.
Hey everyone, I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. First, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more.
So what can we see from this? Well, there's a couple of overarching issues with the fact-checkers. First, I've already mentioned the bias, and we've seen some of that bias play out in Australia's voice referendum. Without playing out the whole voice referendum debate itself again, the main instance in Australia was in relation to the Uluru Statement. The Uluru Statement, as you might remember, and as I've talked about ad nauseum, was a statement detailing, well, the desire for a voice, but also the desire for so-called truth-seeking, and also a Makarrata Commission to oversee agreement-making between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians. The Uluru Statement was the catalyst for the voice referendum. But of course, when you've got terms in there like Makarrata or agreement-making, it does beg the question of what those actually mean. So, Peter Credlin decided to do a Freedom of Information request to find out more information. And lo and behold, as a result of that Freedom of Information request, a longer statement called the Uluru Statement from the Heart, of 26 pages long, came out of the FOI. And indeed, that 26-page statement quadrates with what Uluru Dialogue architects such as Megan Davis had already said. Megan Davis had stated that the Uluru Statement was in fact more than just one page, and was potentially up to 20 pages or maybe 24 pages. The exact length seems to vary depending on whether you include footnotes and how you format things. Nevertheless, Megan Davis had said the Uluru Statement was more than one page. Peter Credlin found a 26-page version of this, and regardless, were the terms agreement making and Makarata required definition, and that definition was not contained in the original one page that was publicized. Regardless, RMIT Fact Lab decided to fact-check Peter Credlin. They claimed that Peter Credlin was misleading, and that the Uluru Statement was only ever one page long. And it was misleading and false to claim that the Uluru Statement was more than one page. However, ABC's Media Watch then disputed the RMIT Fact Lab fact-check. In essence, there were disputes about the fact-check to begin with, in addition to disputes about whether the fact-check was accurate, and about whether the fact-checkers had been very focused on the no side of the voice referendum debate, and not focused enough on the misleading content coming out of the yes side of the debate. In essence, what we've got here are concerns that the fact-checkers were biased in terms of their decision to mainly just fact-check the no side of the campaign and how they went about doing the fact-checks. That was core to what Mark Zuckerberg and Meta were concerned about. The other aspect of this is that fact-checkers can only fact-check a certain amount of information. When you're going around hiring professional fact-checkers, even if we assume that they are actually good at their job, there's only so many of them, and there's only so much money you can spend on fact-checking. Meaning, it's impossible to fact-check everything, and things will obviously slip through the cracks, even if we decide that the fact-checkers were doing a good job to begin with. Then we've got the issue of how much people even trust the fact-checkers. Now, the fact-checkers have dropped the ball to my mind, but let's assume that the fact-checkers had actually been acting in good faith and have been doing so in general. Well, you still have the issue of whether people believe the fact-checkers are acting in good faith. Only it takes a couple of slip-ups for people to lose trust in the fact-checkers. Community notes, by contrast, appear to have broader community support, at least when implemented properly. So if you can community note a particular statement, well then both A, it appears that everyone can fact-check everyone else, so it's not biased in terms of who is fact-checked, but also people are able to partake in the process, thereby giving them buy-in into whether or not they believe the fact-checks are themselves accurate. So there's generally more community support and more trust in a community notes type system than there is in relying on so-called expert fact-checkers. This has been documented a bit in the academic literature, for example. Now, the way the community notes operate obviously is going to influence things. If the community notes are operated in a manner that is biased or just ham-fisted, people simply won't trust them. If the community notes are operated in a manner that at least tries to be unbiased, then people will trust them a bit more. Now, the way this works on Twitter or X, for example, is effectively anyone can write a proposed community note on a post on X. Now, that proposed community note then needs to be rated by other users to determine whether or not it is actually valid or not. And then Twitter/X decides to accept that community note if people of various backgrounds and various different rating records rate that community note as being accurate and reliable. And if the community note is rated as being reliable, then it is attached to that particular post. And that community note then exists as the fact check on that original post. That's how it works. Now, one can debate about whether or not it's prone to errors. For example, it might be a highly technical area where the general public might not necessarily know a lot about the technical details, in which case you might have someone who is not very informed writing what looks like a persuasive community note, but is not really based on good quality information. And if people are just glancing over things quickly, you might end up with a community note that isn't really very fact-based. Furthermore, you can end up with ideological pylons, which is a bit of a problem and is something that X has struggled a little bit to deal with. Nevertheless, the community note system, for all of its flaws, does appear to be better than just having siloed, ideologically driven fact checkers that are perhaps engaging in somewhat biased and one-sided fact checks. And to my mind, Meta's decision is a good one. However, this has not stopped politicians from claiming otherwise. For example, we've had some of the teal independents in Australia claiming that, well, the decision to remove fact checkers is somehow egregious or bad or will let misinformation fester on Meta. However, ironically, that comment itself was posted on X. Furthermore, sections of the legacy media are not particularly thrilled with Meta's decision, but we can all think about why that might be the case. Politicians also are not thrilled with Meta's decision, but it's likely because they're routinely and consistently community noted because politicians continually put out misleading information. The politicians are perhaps some of the biggest sources of so-called misinformation and disinformation and have been since time immemorial. Basically, politicians themselves, well, part of their job appears to be to try to deceive voters into voting for them, so it's not surprising that politicians are a little bit unhappy about being called out. Nevertheless, I view Meta's decision as being a plus. Let me know what you think about Meta's decision to abandon fact checkers in favor of community notes in the comments below. Do you think it's good, bad, or otherwise? Do you think it will let misinformation fester? Or do you think it will actually improve the fact-checking system? Let me know what you think. And if you're interested, you can follow this channel on Twitter/X. I don't post very frequently on there, largely because I don't particularly want to have to pay for 2 sets of Twitter verified, but nevertheless, you can follow me there if you want to. And hopefully I see you next time as well.